Migrating to Australia, the only podcast where you get personality, information, and dynamic involvement from experts. Today, we're doing a live field cross to a very significant person in immigration in Melbourne. But first, I'm Grant Williams, and I'd like to welcome my co-host, Mr. David Bongiorno, Australia's preeminent immigration lawyer with a bald head.
Freshly shaved this morning, Grant. Happy New Year. Great to be back. And we are, this is what, episode 61? I mean, we've got
episode 100 million thousand.
We're doing well. We're doing well. I think you can add to the intro the only English language podcast in migration. I think we're the only one, aren't we?
David, did you get the same email that I got this week talking about the Migrating to Australia podcast?
Oh no, share me the news. I am delighted to hear that. I didn't get the email. What was it?
Let me just look while we're going David, let's introduce our guest and we can have a little pitter-patter titter-tatter while I scroll through these funny emails. We have the general manager of the Immigration Museum. I was going to call it the Australian Immigration Museum, but I think it's only the Melbourne Immigration Museum is the correct title. It's Rohini Kapatath. How are you, Rohini? Welcome aboard.
Thank you so much for having me, Grant and David. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you for taking the time on a Saturday. You're out and about, and it's lovely that we can talk because you're the custodian of culture in this state in a way, aren't you?
Well, actually, I do like that word custodian because that's how we see ourselves, as custodians of a great institution, an institution that is iconic and so core to Melbourne's cultural life. And it's the custodian of all of our stories. We like the term stories of us because those are the stories that I think we document and preserve at the Immigration Museum, the story of Victorians who have made Victoria their home and who have made sometimes really perilous journeys from far-flung lands to get to our shores and to then build a life and add to the multicultural life of our city and of our nation.
Now, how long, the Immigration Museum's 21, 22 years old?
Yes, it is. We celebrated our 21st birthday, 2 years ago. And we've been around that long. Jeff Kennett originally was the visionary who really gave the story to tell the stories of migrants. So, yeah, we really owe a debt of thanks to him.
Now, that's a lovely. Grant and I will agree. It's wonderful to hear something positive about Mr. Kennett. So we won't go any further there. But in terms, Grant might want to.
Well, I was just going to say I was very surprised when I had a look at the date of when the museum started, 1998, in the old Customs House. And I remember at the time, David, there was a debate about what the old Customs House would be used for. Now, do you remember what the other option was at the time?
It's semi-resident. It's partially residential, Rohini, as well, isn't it? Aren't there residential apartments in or around near the museum? Or they're not part of the building, are they?
Now, I'll give you
there's residential apartments around the building, certainly not in the building. The whole building is used for the museum, and we have a beautiful courtyard as well. But there are the Port Authority apartments right beside us. In fact, they're our neighbours, and there's residential apartments there.
Now, okay. David,
we're really delighted that in recent times we've actually, established a really warm and close relationship, and I can share more about that shortly. But the Port Authority residents are our closest neighbours, and in fact, there's commercial occupants as well in the what's now called the Orion House building beside us, and that's where Immigration Museum's administrative offices have been as well for the last 21 years, and we've only just moved our team into the museum this year.
David, can you remember? Well, you've been to the Brisbane casino, not the Gold Coast casino, but the Brisbane casino.
I have indeed.
And you might notice that it looks quite a lot like the current Immigration Museum. And indeed, the Immigration Museum site was going to be the scaled down casino until they decided to build the behemoth across the river.
The monstrosity across the river. Yeah.
So that was one of the options that was.
Well, I think they chose they took the right option. Rohini, one of the things that I get from the museum is it's a living, breathing museum. When I was a young bloke, a long time ago, museums were staid and dusty and old. I get the feeling you've got on your hands, you manage a living, breathing museum.
Absolutely. I mean, we think that museums house the cultural soul of a nation. And in fact, museums are culture and action. And they hold a mirror up to the society in which we live. In that sense, of course, they're a living, evolving, and ever evolving, institution. We think also that as societies change, so must museums to better reflect their histories and their current realities. And that museums are most effective when they're rooted in their societies, when they grow from their communities and are able to provide visions for the future. So given the dramatic rate of change in the 21st century, museums, I think, have a more and more vital role now to shape public discourse and promote new thought. So, in that sense, I think, they are living institutions, ever evolving.
Visions for the future. That's a wonderful line. It's something that many of us have never sort of considered, that thinking the traditional sense that museum is an archive. How does a museum manifest a vision for the future?
The way we do that is by constantly asking ourselves questions about our purpose. Why do we exist? Who do we serve? We think as well that, and this is how as well, that, immigration, if you take, for example, the Immigration Museum, we're embedded in Melbourne CBD, in one of the most diverse geographies on the planet. With over 220 languages spoken, we've got people from all over the world, making all of our local work intrinsically international. So we're constantly asking ourselves, what do our people want from the museum? In that sense, we have been engaged in an ongoing process of consultation while working towards a revitalization plan in order to reflect communities' aspirations for the museum. And where we landed is that, while we remain committed to exploring and sharing Victoria's migration stories, we're also looking to explore stories about what it means to live together in a society that is increasingly diverse and constantly evolving. So in that sense, we're finding new ways to connect people to a sense of our shared humanity, to encourage them to embrace diversity for a just future.
Can you give us some examples?
And to
That's
live
wonderful.
this vision, yes, well, in order to live this vision, it calls on the museum to be a provocateur. So we do that through various experiences. And some of them, I think under one of them, and I'll explain more about it, it's called Under the Olive Tree. And I think it's a great example of how Immigration Museum particularly has encouraged greater understanding between two communities that have historically been in dispute. So it's an annual event that sees musicians from our local Jewish and Arabic communities meeting under an olive tree, which is a symbol that's significant to both cultures. And they meet to engage in a joyous musical celebration that aims to unite across cultures. We do this annually in our beautiful courtyard, and it's got a vibe that is unique, and it's one that is really valued by people who, by the musicians themselves and the visitors on that day.
I'm getting
there are many
goosebumps.
other examples as well. That's only one, but we do this on a regular basis.
but it's a beautiful example. And is that something that's open to all, or is it by invitation only? I mean, that would be, you talk about an aura and a vibe. It would be wonderful to attend. Is it something that's open to the public or invitation only?
No, yeah, it's open to the public, and you know, we try our best to make people aware of these experiences, and I think that um, yeah, that this is one area that we've always got on our radar. Getting the word out has been our greatest challenge, so that people get to become aware of what actually happens at the museum.
How are some of the ways you get the message out so people know? Which channels do you use so that people who are listening can tap in?
Yeah, well, you know, of course, a lot of this is dependent on our budgets as well, our marketing budgets. But we do get the word out through some of the, you know, mainstream, you know, radio channels. We might have some advertisements. We use, you know, broadsheet. Of course, that's the domain of our marketing teams. But they do a really good job of trying to get the word out with the limited resources that they have. And also, of
Rohini,
course, now the internet. Yeah.
Rohini, one thing that has always puzzled me about how the government, and we're talking the Victorian government, sort of treats the Immigration Museum, it never seems to be at the front line when they're pushing events and places to visit.
Mm.
The aquarium always gets a good go, and that's just sort of down the street. I'm I I'm always surprised that it's not one of the things that all the ministers and the public servants and various other tourism spruikers don't throw it into nearly every sentence when they're in front of a camera, because it's it's on Flinders Street. You know, you just walk along there. It's one of the easiest places in the city to visit.
Yeah, well, let me give you a different point of view as well. I think that there is a lot of love for this museum. Um, I think as well that in the recent times, for example, City of Melbourne supported the museum in having it be part of their festive lighting program. So we've actually had the museum up in lights, in beautiful red and green lights through this festive season each night. And so we're really grateful to the City of Melbourne for that support. I think generally, though, that the government and the Victorian government, particularly Premier Andrews, has had again, you know, a great regard for the museum, and supported the museum with investments that enabled us to have the Gandhi exhibition 2.5 years ago. So I think that the government does a great job of supporting its cultural institutions. And as you've seen through the pandemic, that in the post-pandemic world as well, I think there has been that recognition of the role of the cultural sector. And increasingly, the cultural sector is being given the support it needs. Can more be done? I think absolutely. More can always be done, and keeping the Immigration Museum particularly at the forefront is a challenge for Museums Victoria. It's one that the Museums Victoria leadership team also wants to embrace wholeheartedly. But let me tell you, these are really complex institutions to run with fairly modest budgets. And we've got Melbourne Museum, we have Science Works, we have the Royal Exhibition Building, which is another great story in itself. We recently celebrated a major milestone. Most of these institutions require great investments just to keep the lights on, and to maintain the facilities. So they are big guzzlers in that sense. And I think that the institution does its best to be able to share the resources around to meet the requirements. I think, again, podcasts like this, and in any effort to spread the word, and I know that the Mayor Sally Capp herself has been really vested herself in the last year in telling the story of the Immigration Museum too. So I'm grateful for all that people do for the museum, but I'm also acutely aware that we all, as citizens of this city and this state, need to do more. to get the story out, because this institution holds all of our stories.
There are many, many successful business people from migrant backgrounds. Have you ever thought to approach them to help spread the gospel of the museum through funding? I mean, a lot of businesses and set up charities and fund wings of hospitals. What about migration?
Yes, and we've had, after all, of course, the museum's been around for 21 years, and we've had the support of the Maya family. We've had the support of many other people, patrons of the museum. So there is support. We don't want to suggest for a moment that there isn't, and but I think that this is an ongoing process, something that our development and commercial teams, again, are very aware of, and so that this is an ongoing piece of work, and we of course are always grateful for those who come forward to enable the good work of the museum to continue.
My son's just finished primary school. He starts secondary school this year. One of his grade 4 excursions was to the museum. Do a lot of kids go? Do you do a lot of school trips, school field trips?
Yes, indeed. And this is one of the big joys of the museum, that pre-pandemic, we had 6 schools a day visiting the museum. We play quite an important role in Victoria's education curriculum. And the museum, as an educator for over 20 years, we've been, of course, committed to sharing Victorian migration stories. We educate not only the schools, we educate our visitors on these stories. And, each person has their own story. And as a museum for the people, we hope that every one of our visitors, and particularly our education visitors, can find a piece of their heritage and their history on our walls to connect with. The museum also goes the extra mile in innovating new ways to reach the school's audience in a post-pandemic era. So through the last year, while our doors have been closed, we have continued to educate Victoria's school-going children through our online curriculum.
Rohini, I might take the opportunity to expand on that point. How about you give our mammoth global audience a bit of a history lesson? What are the general themes and the stages of immigration into Australia?
Well, if you consider, in the 1800s, if you consider when we first saw the, let me use the word, our colonizers who came in. And that was the first wave, really, and that was when, in fact, we had the ships coming up the Yarra, and in those old days, they would stop right in front of what's called the Yarra Yarra Falls, which separated the salt water from the fresh water. We had our indigenous people who sat and who had, built their lives around the river. They would fish on a regular basis, and that was how they sustained themselves. When the Yarra Yarra, and that those Yarra Yarra falls created like a natural turning basin, so the ships would turn around and they'd put their goods on the shore, and that's when they would come into the old customs house to pay their customs duties. So that was the origination of the old customs house. Over the years, as the Yarra Yarra falls were removed, we saw that the fresh water and salt water were mixed, and that kind of impacted the indigenous food source, resulting in our indigenous people having to sort of relocate elsewhere. From then on, we've seen waves and waves of migration. We've had in the World War One. After World War One, we saw a number of people coming from various parts of the world, seeking refuge here in Australia. We then had the World War II migrants, and that's what you've seen the Italians, the Greeks, who, for example, came We had the potato farmers from Ireland.
Oh, we've lost Rohini.
It's been built.
Rohini,
Can you hear me?
could you repeat that answer? We lost you there after the potato
Did you?
farm. Yeah.
I see. Well, yeah. Well, we've seen waves of migration since then. People who have come and established their lives here in Victoria. In fact, Victoria has been built on the labor and sweat of so many of our migrants. But yeah.
The common perception that I think we have, David and I are a similar age, and we learnt about the big Chinese influx for the gold period, and the gold period had a mix of people. After the First World War, was that mostly British Commonwealth people coming in?
Yes, and in fact, at that time, Australia had quite an advertising campaign going on in the UK to try and lure people to come to this land of the golden sun and golden sands. So many of our if you think of the 10-pound poms, which is what was that's a colloquial term, and we had an exhibition on this theme as well about our British migrants who came to Australia. There are many stories about how they found life here, but many of them went back home because they found the life here to be quite hard.
All of our great musical talents that we celebrate from the sort of 60s and 70s, they nearly exclusively were part of that 10-pound pom movement. They were the children of 10-pound pom migrants. We think of AC/DC, the Easy Beats. He'll probably want to kick my bum if I'm wrong, but I think John Farnham. You've got Jimmy Barnes, John Swan. The list just goes on and on and on of all that sort of talent that we quite rightly celebrate. But they're all the result of that one migration program, extremely discriminatory as it was.
That's right. I mean, all of that happened, under the White Australia policy setting. And, there was, of course, this a big push to specifically bring migrants from Britain to Australia. And yes, I mean, I think in hindsight, of course, you could sort of consider whether what that policy was all about. But today, of course, we have a very different mix in our migration, and we're seeing, particularly with this focus on our international students, to bring people in. And Melbourne's become such a key destination for studies for people globally that we're seeing a very different mix in our migration.
Rohini, with that intake with international students who, when the vaccines are in our arms and borders open again, will return, we hope. How do you capture the stories of 220 different language groups? It's a very, very difficult task with limited funding. How do you not exclude people?
Yes, and this is a real curatorial challenge, and something that we're very mindful of. Ensuring that we tell all the stories and tell it in the best way we can. So, we have started to move in the direction of capturing universal themes that connect us as humans. And while we tell the stories, as we did in the Love exhibition, for example, we tell the story from different, a real depth and diversity of lenses from, to ensure that we're capturing people from across various cultures and age and gender and all the many ways in which we define ourselves today.
We have a lot of refugees from various communities in Africa and various communities in Southeast Asia, Cambodia, Vietnam, for example. They've come in many instances from traumatic backgrounds. How does the museum deal with their stories?
With a great amount of empathy and sensitivity and an understanding. And this usually takes us really being part of these communities and engaging with them on a regular basis. We're making sure that we tell the story together with them, not for them. So I think museums today are really asking questions like, whose voice is in this story. We're wanting to ensure that we are co-creating these experiences together with community. I think that is one of our key aspects of our strategy today, is very much around being champions of diversity, but really ensuring that that the story is actually told by the people themselves who have the lived experience of what we're talking about.
Have any of your... You go, Grant.
Sorry, Rohini, we rightly have a great story to celebrate in Australia about our current multicultural society. But how does the museum deal with what you mentioned before, the White Australia policy? How do you, and to extend that, do you think we still recognize and sort of review that that's who we once were, or have we made an attempt to just forget that that was who Australia was, that the government actually used to put out advertisements that said things like two Wongs don't make a white? Have we, do you think we've collectively just tried to forget it rather than continually confront it and reevaluate it?
Yes, I think museums today are trying their best to be agents of truth, and yeah, there has been a significant erosion of trust in public institutions, but I think museums have maintained this trust because we are indeed constantly trying to understand the nuances of the ever evolving story. So whilst we continue to have in the Immigration Museum as well the story of our our colonial history, the White Australia policy, the impacts of that, but we are all, we are now in fact looking at our what's called the timeline gallery and looking at telling that story from the lens of our indigenous people. So this is very important and careful work within the museum, and this position of trust that we have with the community is a privileged position. It's one that we uphold and delicately care for. So right as we speak, our curators are looking at kind of retelling our immigration story from that lens of our Indigenous and our First Nations peoples. So I think it's an important question that you raise, and it's one that we see lies at the heart of our work every single day. In fact, in the identity exhibition, where we've had examples of, for example, racism and the ways in which and even where museums have kind of displayed those objects as part of what we would today term as racist attitudes and behaviors, be they conscious or subconscious. I think that even there, museums are carefully re-explaining those stories. So we're kind of updating the narrative that sits around our collections on a daily basis. And that's what the public has come to expect of us. At the Immigration Museum, we're committed to being a safe and welcoming space for all. a space that can present unbiased information that is aimed at educating and fostering understanding. So we understand that as a trusted source of knowledge, we've got to keep ensuring that that knowledge base is updated on a regular basis, and that is the work of our curators.
Second and third generation Australians are on their way, if not already, to having lost first generation members of their families. Has anyone after an exhibition ever come to you or your team and said, I understand my background now a lot more because you've helped me understand what my grandparents went through or what my parents went through?
On a regular basis, absolutely. I mean, in fact, the experience of the museum is not just about the collections that we display, it's about the conversations that are sparked on the museum floor between our visitors and our visitor engagement teams and our curators if they're there. So it's very much a living experience in that you see a story, you might see a story that gives you a sense of who you are, your identity, where you've come from, and that results in some very poignant moments. And I can just think of moments like when I met with somebody who had just been to our Discovery Center and had seen the boarding pass on which she traveled in the ship as a 3-year-old, and she'd come on one of the ships and she got to see that, and she was visibly moved by that, and it sparked in her a sense of her own history and her own journey with her parents on that ship.
Rohini, you used the term, or was it visitor? Was it facilitator? What was it? Visitor interaction team, or
the visitor engagement teams.
Visitor engagement team. So if David and I decide to go down and pop into the museum after we've had a quick lunch in the city, how will the visitor engagement team deal with us? What essentially do they do with a visitor?
Well, they welcome the visitor. They get a.
Oh, we've lost Rohini.
Oh, hopefully she'll pop back in a minute. She's obviously having a good time down there at Cape Shank, but
no sunshine, but a beautiful place to be on a weekend.
Yeah. Well, hopefully she pops back in a minute. David, while we're waiting.
Oh yeah, tell me what happened this week with the feedback.
Hi, Grant. My name is Anuj Agarwal. He's not the bowler for India playing in the Tests at the moment. He's the founder of FeedSpot. I'd like to personally congratulate you as your website, Migrating to Australia podcast, has been selected by our panelists as one of the top 10 Australian immigration podcasts on the web.
I love it.
I personally give you a high five and want to thank you for your contribution to this world. So thank you, David, for your contribution to this world.
Thank you, Grant.
This is the most comprehensive list of top 10 Australian immigration podcasts. Now, do you think that the comprehensive list of top 10 immigration podcasts has more than 10 podcasts on it?
I think we've had a few precede us, but they haven't had our longevity.
P.S. So we'd be grateful if you would help us spread the word by briefly mentioning the top 10 Australian immigration podcast lists in any of your upcoming posts. Well, I won't mention it in the posts, sorry, Anuj, but I will mention you in the podcast. Welcome back, Rohini.
It kind of reminds me, Grant.
I lost you there.
Oh, we've got you back, thank goodness.
Welcome back. We're just reviewing that email we were talking about earlier. I have to give you the PS, David. PS, upgrade to FeedSpot Pro to add an additional 100-character description for your website and brand in the list.
It reminds me of when I was 14, I was a very good tennis player, and in a southeastern suburb tournament, I was a quarter finalist because there were only 8 people playing.
Well, I'm honoured. Thank you, Anuj Agarwal, the founder of FeedSpot. I'm very happy that we've been included in the comprehensive list of top 10 Australian immigration podcasts.
Read out, where do we sit? You didn't tell us where we sit on the top 10 list.
He didn't tell us either.
He didn't tell us.
I probably have to pay $5 to find out what I already know. I already know who's the best Australian immigration podcast. Do you, David?
I think we do. So Rohini, welcome back. Oh, you there?
I think.
Yes, I am here. Thank you.
There we go. You sound like you're being blown towards the cliff. There we go. I think someone's pulled you back from the cliff edge. That's good.
People listening who might come for a visit when the borders drop or come back as international students, we hope that they listen and are enticed to visit. What, in terms of the guides, how many languages? I mean, we have 220 different language groups. How many languages can people take a tour in the Migration Museum? In how many languages?
This is something that is, being really looked at present. We have some audio guides. We have audio guides in Mandarin, and we have some people in our visitor engagement team who speak different languages. For example, we have a person who speaks Tamil, one that speaks Bengali, people who speak Hindi, and but language is an issue that we are looking at more closely. What we find, though, is that most of the people who come are able to enjoy the experience in English, and so the museum has kind of focused very much on sharing the stories in English alone. We're finding it a challenge actually to sort of serve up all of our stories in various languages. It is quite a resource intensive exercise, and we do our best with respect to with the audio guides.
One of the easiest but also most effective ways for cultures to understand each other is food. Now, have you guys done any exhibitions, or do you have any joint activities with restaurants, cafes around town?
Yes, I mean, this is a big focus again, and often we'll have various festivals, and at festival time, food, of course, is so much a part of a person's identity and cultural identity. So we our public programming team are always on the lookout for exciting food offers. We work with our caterers as well, with whom we arrive at authentic culinary experiences to sort of complement the our public programming experiences. So yes, of course, food is something we've done a lot with for example, with the Moroccan food and Chinese dim sums and so on. So yeah,
beautiful. I'm getting hungry. Grant, have you had lunch? I'm getting very hungry. I haven't had lunch.
Not yet. Rohini, when the world returns back to normal and we'll have our visitors back coming into Melbourne, what are the operating hours and what days is the museum generally open, and what's the easiest way for someone to get there?
The museum's open from 10 to 5 every day of the year except for Christmas and Good Friday. So the ways to get there, you can get there by train, by coming to Flinders station, and then we're just 2 stops away from Flinders station. You can cycle there as well, and so more recently we've sort of started to see many more Melbourne's becoming more of a bike-friendly city, and we are really keen to attract the cycling community. We've got some bike parks as well, and in fact, we've got good cycles opening up in this year, later in the year, right across the road from us. So we're really excited about engaging with the cycling community. Of course, there's buses that come into the city as well. You can drive, and we have arrangements with the car park right opposite us so that all of our visitors get discounted car parking in the car park on Flinders Street.
That's very important, Rohini, because car parks are extortion, like in their charging of fees. How much does it cost for a car park?
Well, on weekends, which is when the visitors usually come, it's $8 for a car park, and you can go in and out as many times as you like. And on weekdays, it's a $16 fee for the car park. Again, you can go in and out a number of times.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. When they charge $75 after 3 hours, $16 for the day is fantastic.
Yes, it was really important for us to sort of negotiate that, because we understand that the journey to the museum begins from when you leave home, when you decide to come to the museum. So we've looked closely at that visitor journey and tried to make it as convenient and accessible for people to come and visit.
And let's not forget my favorite way to get there, and I think anyone who's visiting Melbourne and doesn't have a car will probably get on the City Circle tram, because that takes you to lots of the attractions. And as Rohini said, there's a tram stop pretty much out the front. So, yeah.
Rohini, memberships. Rohini, can people become members of the Immigration Museum?
Yes, memberships. It's a really good idea, I think, to become a member of Museums Victoria, because in that one membership you've got access to all of our museums.
Oh, okay, fantastic.
Yeah, so
fantastic.
It's really comparatively inexpensive. It's and it allows you unlimited visits to all the museums throughout the year.
Given you all come under the same umbrella, is there any sibling rivalry?
I think that there's always sibling rivalry, I think, in every family, and we are no different. But I think we do a great job of really understanding what our relative strengths are, and we do a great job of supporting each other in ensuring the best experience in each one of our museums. So no, I love my colleagues, the general managers of Melbourne Museum and Science Works are my dear friends, and we have a wonderful camaraderie, and we each really want to see our museums do really well for the city.
We always, when we're not just talking about immigration law, we talk about immigration journey. Now, we've got the double banger with you. You're the expert and the driving force at the moment behind the Immigration Museum, but you've got your own story to tell.
Indeed, yes, I'm a migrant as well, and I came 30 years ago on a plane, on a Qantas plane, and never looked back. And Australia's given me a chance to really build a life of significance, and I've really enjoyed every moment of the journey so far.
Rohini, did you come as a student?
Actually, I did come and study initially. I studied. I took on a program in. It was called. It was about mainframe computing. So it taught us how to operate the large mainframe computers, and it was a program that then also placed you in a role in one of the in an organization. So I had the wonderful opportunity to work as a mainframe computer operator at Grace Brothers in Sydney.
Fantastic.
And so that was my first job, and then that took me into becoming a computer operator at what was called York Motors, which was later bought over by Toyota, and again as a mainframe computer operator, operating the large IBM and the Fujitsu machines. Subsequently, I went on to do some COBOL programming as well, and then decided to move in the direction of computer software rather than hardware, and landed a wonderful opportunity to work for an American software company in Sydney called SAS Institute. And that break really resulted in a super career in the technology industry, which was really a sunrise industry at the time.
Rohini, what drove your decision when you were back, and which city did you fly out from on the Qantas jet?
I flew out from Calcutta. I landed in Sydney. And, as a young person, in fact, I celebrated my 21st birthday in Sydney. I'd landed literally in the month of my 21st birthday in January of 1987. And really, all I knew about Australia at the time really was from what I'd heard, in in the geography books. And I'd heard about Sydney and Melbourne. These were the two great cities, and I, heard about the desert in the center. And other than that, there was not. Australia was unknown to me.
So you didn't have family who came before you?
Not family who came before me, but I did, come with. I had family.
Let's
I did have some other family members as well.
David, we never let an opportunity to use a well-worn cliche in this show. So, Rohini, you said you didn't know much about Australia.
No.
But if I said Don Bradman or Steve Waugh in 1987, you would have known those names. Oh no!
Oh, and we've lost Rohini down to Cape Shank.
I'm pretty sure we'll find out when she comes back. No doubt she will. I'm pretty sure that she'll have known about Don Bradman, not Don Bradman, kangaroos, the desert, and beaches. I reckon.
Well,
here we go.
They're cliches, but they're truths. They're absolute truths. Yeah.
Rohini, welcome back. Welcome back. Now, how did I go? How did I go with those two names? Surely a young lady from sitting there in Kolkata in 1987 would have known Don Bradman and Steve Waugh.
I definitely knew about Don Bradman. I'm trying to think about whether Steve Waugh had risen to prominence at that time, but
I think 87 was the height of his powers. So.
Okay, well, I would have known about him then, I think, but certainly, of course, India is a cricketing nation. We all know that. But I was from Calcutta, and in Calcutta we played soccer. So I was big in the two big teams, the Mohun Bagan and East Bengal.
Beautiful.
So I was always, a soccer fan, and went to all the games, and not all the games really, some of the games. But especially when they played there, and they played soccer at Eden Gardens too from time to time.
And when you were in Sydney as a 21-year-old, did you go and get into the National League? Because the National League was around then. Did you look at our National League in soccer?
No, not really, because to be honest, I think when you come into this country as a migrant, your real focus, sport and all those activities are real luxuries. You really have come with a focus to make it. And so what really excited me at the time was about career progression, getting that first job, and just landing that job, and then going to work and making a market work. And I really enjoyed the time that I spent in the office, and I gave it my 150%. And my big highlights were around were more around, your promotions and, okay, now you've got a company car and you get to go and buy the car. And so when I bought the Honda Civic as part of my, work package and so on, I bought a beautiful red Honda Civic at the time. I still remember feeling like I just made it. That I might have been about 24 by then, and feeling that absolute sense of deep joy.
How,
So, the art sector and the sporting sector, these were just, in the periphery and did not play a major role in our lives. Life was all about making it and making it big.
the Australian work ethic is not like the migrant work ethic. That's a nice way of putting it.
Oh,
How did you?
absolutely, yes.
I'm being polite to Australians. What did you think about those who are clocking off at 5 to 5 and 10 to 5? I mean, you've been given an opportunity. You've taken it with both hands. You're supremely focused. How did the Australian work ethic sit with you when you first arrived?
Yeah, I found it really, really odd. Right from the time that I was studying, I found that the students were not very serious. I found myself being quite, focused in the class and really there with a mission, there with a desire to then land that first work experience role, really, maxing it in the classroom. But finding that that was really not why the others were there. The others were really fooling around in class. I found that to be, very distracting, and I found that even the teachers were. I think they were at a loss because they couldn't really. They were part of it, as a matter of fact. So they were part of the fooling around in the class and so on. So that was a very, very different environment to the one that I'd grown up in, and even in terms of in terms of what society around you valued. What I also found, with respect to the work ethic, that there was this big culture of people going for a drink after work, and I again did not understand that, because the notion of just getting together to drink was just really foreign, and I did not see any value in that. For me, it was about relationships, building the relationships, inviting people home. So I think there's a big disconnect there, that usually many cultures, inviting somebody home is the sign of your wanting to build that relationship with them, not necessarily going out to have a drink at a pub. And and I found it, so these were the nuances where I found people here at that time. I'm going back 30 years ago now, were not doing a lot of the inviting people home. Of course, they were young, they were just establishing themselves, but we did a lot of that, and kind of that was where the mind was at, in terms of building a circle of friends and friendship groups, and many of whom remain friends, for example.
One of the things, Rohini, that's still a problem now and would have been an even bigger problem 30 years ago, you've come from a magnificent 24-hour city, Kolkata, to a 16-hour city in Sydney and a 16-hour city in Melbourne. Did it take time to adjust to the smaller city, the slower pace? Was there some adjustment there?
There was a huge period of adjustment because, yes, it was very quiet. I was used to the hustle and bustle and seeing a lot of people. And here, we were in a situation where we did not see, cars pass you by for minutes sometimes, and certainly no people walking on the streets. So, yeah, there was a huge period of adjustment. And at the same time, the country offered us so much in terms of opportunity. It offers us a lot. It offers a lot to people who are willing to work hard.
The Indian diaspora is massive in the United Kingdom. It's massive here. India's growing, and India is a major power. Do you think that the people will continue to migrate, or do you think one day people will say, "Look, life is good in India, and I'm going to stay home after I've finished my master's degree in Australia"? Do you think the flow will ever slow?
I think that people are always going to be looking outward for opportunity, and yeah, absolutely, India does offer a lot. But you can see with the global pandemic, Australia has been a very safe place to be, hasn't it? So there'll always be reasons why people choose to leave home and come to new lands. And till you have that human spirit will always guide you to doing that. So no, I think there'll always be a reason for people to leave home and seek out new pastures.
When did you become a citizen? Rohini, we've lost you.
Hello, sorry, I can't hear you, but I'm so sorry. I think that we've got some tech.
When did you become a citizen?
There's a bit of disturbance at present.
Yeah, someone's using a radio or magnetic thing somewhere there. Can you hear that?
Can you hear us, Rohini?
I think maybe they've got a secret Five Eyes installation down there at Cape St.
Well, you never know. You never know.
You do never know. That's only half joking.
It's half joking, correct.
Rohini, can you hear us now? I think we're having problems that they don't sound.
Grant, I'm so sorry, the line is a bit patchy. I'm not able to hear you. I'm just wondering whether.
Yep, maybe drop off and come in again. I think if you can hear us. I can hear that interference. Can you hear it, David?
Yeah, it sounds like
an electric substation or something like that.
I think that the connection is proving to be. I can't hear you.
Yeah, no, there's definitely some interference.
There's a few minutes of editing.
Well, we can maybe come up with another story. I did get another ridiculous email, but hi, Rohini. Yeah, Rohini's having a terrible time there.
Okay, Grant, I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm not able to actually hear you very well.
We just heard you then. We'd lost you for a few moments.
I'd like to sort of continue the conversation at another time, or would like to.
Sure. We can do that. That's fine. If you can hear it,
yeah, let's aim to do that.
Fantastic, Rohini. That's a good idea.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Grant. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Rohini.
What you've said to us.
Thank you.
But I really enjoyed that conversation today, and I'm so sorry that it's got the technology that hasn't quite been here.
It's failed us, which is very rare, but it's understandable. Thanks, Rohini.
Thank you both. Thank you.
Bye.
That's unfortunate, but it's having been down there, it's notorious for phone coverage. It's notorious. And lots of dead patches.
I did manage to hear, David, that Rohini said she'd like to continue the conversation at another time, and we'll organise to do that. I think what we might do is perhaps organise to go down to the museum, and perhaps we could invite somebody like Abul down, and we could have an
OB, a live OB.
Well, wouldn't it be great to have Abul and Rohini together, and maybe we need an agent provocateur to talk about the timeline of migration in Australia and what drove each period. But I love the idea that there's a timeline down there, and
we'll have to get down there and have a look before we do it, because my boy's been and he's the only person I know who has been. It sounds fantastic. It sounds absolutely wonderful.
What I love is, and I'm not sure if he picked up on it, but she's got the timeline down there, or they have the timeline down there.
Yeah.
But it's in the timeline of the Indigenous Australians, and then it's got where all the rest of us drop in.
It's beautiful.
So,
it's beautiful, and
yeah.
it's really important that people see that and get the full context. I want to do Under the Olive Tree. I would love to be there for Under the Olive Tree. That'd be quite amazing.
Now, David, let's work on a bit of that controversy. The White Australia policy.
Oh, we're not going there. We're not going there. I don't. It's an odious part of this country's history, an odious part.
But do you remember when it ended?
71?
72, Whitlam coming
72.
in.
Yeah, I knew it was Whitlam. I thought it was 71. Odious. Absolutely odious period in this country's history.
One of the first things that he did. Now, so that was 72. About 15 years later, we had the coalition government welcoming in and changing the entry procedures to welcome in the Vietnamese and then Cambodian refugees from Indochina. But in 15 years, the Conservative parties in Australia went from being vehement critics of the Whitlam government changing the White Australia policy to being the key drivers for accepting the Indo-Chinese wave of refugees. So when it can take 100 years, 150 years for attitudes to change, but when they do, they can change very, very quickly. Because
look how lucky we've been with the Vietnamese community in their 50 or 51 years. How many years is it now? 75. So what? 5 to 25, 46 years. I hate maths. That's why I became a lawyer. 46 years they've been here.
Yeah, we're talking.
75 on.
We're coming up to sort of that period of 50 years where we're
not far away. Look what they've done. Look what the Vietnamese have done. They've been wonderful contributors to society in every level, in every way. They've done in 50 years what many cultures have taken 100, 150 years to do. We're much richer and more fortunate for having them, and the Cambodians as well.
And the thing, I was reflecting on this just because we've been, in this time where we've all been locked in, I've been using a lot more social media programs, social chat programs, and it just dawned on me how sort of colorblind I've become in terms of when you're talking to people. 15 years ago, if you were confronted with someone that popped into your life and they were Asian or African, you would feel compelled to know their story. Why are you here? While you're not really judging them, you still, from your own perspective, were wondering, why are you here? Why, and now I just don't think that that's the first thing people do. I think they just go, oh yeah, how are you? Where are you? The question, where are you from, is more often about which suburb do you live? What train line do you have to catch to go to work, rather than what's your country, what's your ethnic heritage?
Australia is their country, absolutely. One of the most exciting visits I had about 20 years ago was a Cuban dancer. Now, I would love to see a Cuban dancer get a visa today. I think it would be a lot harder than it was 20 years ago. But over the years, I've helped people from, I'll have to do a count. I think we did a count once of how people from how many different countries, with the recipients of migration, we're richer for it, we're better for it. It doesn't matter where people come from, it matters where they end up. And it's exciting. We never ever forget, though, having said that, we never ever forget their history and their stories, ever. But the joy of living in the present and sharing experiences with people who are from different ethnic backgrounds is one of the best things. It's one of the most important things I love from immigration. People come here and they want to be part of something that's big and special, that's Australia. And you and I know how much, through this show in particular, how much we see, how much people have contributed to this country to make it better. ISO, lockdown of borders, we've been starved of immigration. There are people here who are temporary residents who want to stay, and we can help them stay. But I can't wait for the doors to open and more people to make Australia their home. I'm really, really looking forward to it.
David, I had my phone on silent, so I didn't see exactly when this popped in, but my phone battery is at 1%. Rohini.
Oh, it's a phone battery
My
and
phone
technical.
battery is at 1%. So totally understandable. Again, Rohini was because of family commitments and whatnot, she wasn't able to be at her home base in front of her computer or in her office. She was roaming around the wilds of one of the most rugged parts of the Victorian coastline. So that was a really terrific.
She didn't tell us what her son was doing. He might have been surfing, playing golf, cross country running.
I know the son had to go to. There was a family thing further down the peninsula. So she veered off on her own to get on her own to do the interview. So we appreciate that. Now, David, let's do a bit of blowing our own trumpet. I think the last time we talked about our listeners and talking about statistics, I think I mentioned about 12,000.
No, it's unique downloads.
Yeah,
I think it was 15. I might be wrong.
No, it wasn't 15. It was 12, because we're now nearly 13,500 since
unique
then.
Downloads.
Yeah, but
and so does that mean 13,500 different people or 13,500 different downloads? Like, I mean, I listen. So are they 50 downloads from me?
That's different downloads. So yeah, that means that if everybody's listened to each one, we've got that sort of, I don't know how many hundred different listeners. But the thing I really want to go to is that we've got how many countries? I'm trying to see how many countries we're in. So there's 50.
I'm dying to the day that you tell me there's somebody from Upper Volta, which is now known as, quick one, Grant, testing your African geography. Upper Volta is now known as?
I know it when I see it. It's the one with the funny name, and I'll know exactly when I look at the map.
Go on, have a look at the map without the
the name of the countries. It's
just look at the global. You know, the global panorama.
Yeah, no, I know. No, you've got me. I know what it is, but I don't.
I'll give you a clue. It's two words: B and F.
Burkina Faso.
Good man, bravo.
Yeah. No, I don't. I know my countries. Now that's why the numbers didn't look good. I've got to go back. It's not tallying up all the years. Here we go. We've got to go.
It's got the best capital. I don't know if the capital name has changed. Ouagadougou.
Ouagadougou. Yeah.
And if anyone is listening, please tell us if we've come remotely close to Ouagadougou.
Here we go. This is better. So, just looking at the map again. Now we're slowly closing in on Africa. It's getting better. We've now Botswana and Zimbabwe are in there all the time. Kenya,
Grant, did you know a lot of Botswana's doctors train in Australia?
Yeah.
Many of them go to Monash University, government funded, and then go back and do good in the community in Botswana.
We've almost filled in all of South America. So we're
anybody from Guyana, French Guiana?
Just going to tell you that. I'm just checking, just going back. So what are we missing? We're missing Guyana, French Guiana, Suriname, and still that looks like Ecuador.
Do you know who would be one of the most famous Surinamers? Have you ever heard of the great Milan footballer Ruud Gullit?
No, I was trying to think. I was trying to think of a cricketer because my mind was a cricket there. But look,
Ruud Gullit played for the Dutch team, but he was a Surinamer.
so we're 1, 2, 3, 4. We're 5 countries away from dominating South America. So Ecuador, French Guiana, and Suriname, and the old Homer Simpson joke, you are gay, aren't listening to us, Dave.
I've had in 15 years of practice one person from Uruguay, only one. And only one from Paraguay as well. How many people are listening in Paraguay?
Paraguay. Let me get there. There we go. We've only 2. They haven't stuck around. But that's Bolivia, Peru, Paraguay. We've got a lot of work to do. Argentina and Bolivia, Colombia, Venezuela. That's all really nice. But we've got most of Asia covered now. We've just got a few of the stans. Kazakhstan are on board. But it looks like all the Uzbekistans and have we got Azerbaijan? Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan are on board, but all the other Turkmenistans and whatnot, they're not on board. But Africa's where the sort of hole is, and that's, I'm going to guess, because there's still not a lot of reliable internet in so much of Africa. And I think a lot of people, I still find this when I say this to people in Australia, podcast, and they go, podcast? What's that? So and I go, don't you know that we've been listed in the top 10 best podcast in Australia?
I'm dying to see who the others are. I mean, you I think you told me the other day. We had a couple of people in the same space, but they stopped a while back. We're the last men standing.
Look,
do you remember what Paul Hogan said in the 70s?
No.
Whenever everyone around you is losing their head, you'll be the tallest person in the room. That's us.
Exactly. Well, look, while we're just fooling around, why don't I type in migration? This is one of those fraught exercises that you do, David, when you haven't checked the answer already. Migration Podcasts Australia. Number 1, Migrating to Australia podcast on Apple Podcasts. Number 2, Migrating to Australia podcast.com. Number 3, OpenSpotify.com show. Migrating to Australia podcast on Spotify.
Oh, show us that. You have to screenshot that and email it to me and put it on the website.
TuneIn.com podcast, Migrating to Australia. Then Stitcher, Migrating to Australia. Then
is that because
here we go.
It's because we're the only one.
Player FM, Best Immigration to Australia podcast 2021, Player FM. Number 1, Australian politics, Migrating to Australia podcast. Yes. So, there we are, and we're beating the SBS podcast and the Lawfare podcast and another one from SBS. So there we go, Dave.
Oh, can you send me those screenshots? I need to show the team and my 13-year-old son who jokes repeatedly about how many people listen to us. So. Send it through. We'll put it on social media. We're claiming number 1 spots.
I'll have to do 2 shots. Here we go. Command Shift 3. Come on. And down here, Command Shift 3. There we go. So I've got the two there. So
what was the question you keyed into Google?
Migration Podcast Australia.
And we come up, and you didn't ask. Did you ask how did you just determine the ranking? How is that on page one? One on page one, or
that's page one. On there are 2,700,000 results, and the top 10 on page one. Domination.
how much money can't buy that prominence?
Well, we're just we're just tooting our own horn here, Dave.
I'm getting excited. I'm waiting for it to come through to my email.
But we've been doing it for a few.
We've been doing it for 2 years.
I think we've been doing it for 2.5 years. I think it was August. I think it was August 2018 that we did the first one. And we've had a few gaps, but I think this is a test, David. We do stuff that's relevant, and
that's it. Correct.
And we always try and dear listener, we always
highlight developments in law, bring to your attention people of interest who've migrated, people who've succeeded, and
be entertaining, relevant and entertaining. And look, we have fun. So hopefully that comes through to everybody else, even if we do waffle on a bit long occasionally. Now, David, there has been some immigration news since we were last live, but it hasn't been good news.
There's, you know what? Immigration is a mix of good, bad, and news. Neutral news, but news that's not fit to print. Tell me, what are you referring to in particular?
Well, there was this is all COVID related, and we had what's now called the what is it? The heads of Australian government. What are they calling that now? The Premier's Conference, or what do they call it now?
Some acronym, God knows.
So basically, all the premiers get together with the Prime Minister, and they decided to halve the intake from overseas of anybody, Australians or
bad for everybody. I know.
Arriving in Australia. Now, that was one thing. That was all to deal with the new
strain,
and to try and stop it spreading, and to stop the South African strain getting to Australia. But the knock-on effect is that Emirates have announced that the last flight into Brisbane was on Friday, and the last flights into Melbourne and Sydney are on Tuesday.
Until further notice.
And they will now only fly to Perth twice a week. So all of those people that were coming back to Australia
had their flights cancelled. It's awful news. Awful.
But it just goes to show the warnings. People, I don't like to blame anyone for the predicament that they're in. That's not what I'm doing. But people were saying a long, long time ago, it's the time to go home. If you think you ever need to go home, the time to go home is now. It's like when the Victorian government said, don't leave Victoria for Christmas, New Year.
And people did. And look what happened.
They didn't make the rule. They just said, don't go, because things might change. If you don't need to go, don't go. Everyone went, things changed, and now people can't get home. Or they've got a quarantine. You just have to be so careful with this. It's just
movable feast, dangerous movable feast. Hopefully, we'll get some good news once people are in receipt of the vaccine. When's the rollout? March?
Apparently it's in 2 weeks. There,
So early
2 weeks
Feb.
time, 2 weeks time they will start getting the.
Is it the AstraZeneca?
No, the first lot are going out to the frontline quarantine staff.
But the AstraZeneca medication or?
No. Pfizer is going
Oh,
out.
Pfizer. Okay, good. Yep.
That's going out to the first ones, which are the high risk and the frontline. That's the hotel staff in the quarantine hotels, sort of the people.
You and I are category 2B, aren't we? So 1A, then 2A, we're 2B.
Yeah, I think we're
over 50.
I think we're a chance. Oh well, I might be able to say, but cancer.
Yeah, you can do 2A. Absolutely, absolutely.
Cancer. We'll see. I'll ask my GP and see what they say. But that's when the AstraZeneca doses are going to start going out, because you can only get the Pfizer one if it's been stored at minus 70 degrees.
92% efficacy. AstraZeneca 62% efficacy.
After that's after one shot. So,
like Christopher Walken in Deer Hunter, one shot.
Yeah, but I think I hate to agree with the government, David, but I think it's better to have more people 50% protected with a follow up in 3 months than
100%. 100% agree.
Less people protected.
Absolutely.
So, David, there's something else I didn't tell you. The second listing for Migrating to Australia podcast on Google, it says helping you on your migration journey, I think is what the headline would be.
Your email hasn't come through yet. Go on.
Oh no, I haven't sent the email. I just took the screenshots.
Oh, okay.
But it's in Spanish, I think. It's in Spanish or Italian, the second listing. So, and that would not surprise me, because a lot of Spanish countries are listening to us.
Yeah.
Hang on. And then hang on, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, I thought I got to the bottom of the list. Listen notes. Migrating to Australia podcast, David Bongiorno. Podchaser.com, Migrating to Australia podcast. Radio.com, Migrating to Australia podcast. Migrationworld.com. Oh, that's not us.
Who is it?
That's
SBS.
No, it's Migration World. Emanuela Canini podcast, coronavirus subsidies. That's not us. And then the bottom one is an ad for gold migration. So there we go. The bottom one on the list is not us. I'm going to follow where it.
You're right. I'm just looking at Migrating to Australia podcast on Google. Gold migration ad on top. Our podcast. Yeah. Apple, Spotify. Migrating to Australia podcast itself, Stitcher. Yeah, you're right. Tune in. Google. On page 1. Podchaser.
And then this is what I love about these ridiculous law sites, mate. So then we go to migrationworld.com.au and it's got a beautiful picture at the top, podcast and news. And it's a guy standing in front of a room full of computers, and then there's a door on the other side with another room full of supercomputers. Podcast and news. What's that got to do with bloody
computers?
Bank of supercomputers.
Yeah.
But Emanuela Canini podcast, they do 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 6 minutes. So that they do a totally different, and that's an Italian
language podcast.
Italian language, I think. And
okay, good on it.
But they just do a quick thing, like the podcaster that I highlighted on my other podcast, Not Just Another Podcast, James Dapici. who is a commercial lawyer, and he
Oh,
does
he's wonderful, James.
case
James,
note.
coffee and case notes. Hello, James, if you're listening, if you've gone this far. I love coffee case notes. It's wonderful. And James is also on TikTok.
And another podcast he does. Look, you've got to check this one out. Spooko. James is terrified of horror movies. He won't watch them because they freak him out. So a friend of his reads him the plot of horror stories, and James freaks out anyway. So,
James has got a fantastic voice. Fantastic voice.
Yeah.
It's basso profundo. He's he's a very, very smart lawyer and very, very smooth operator. He's what would we say? He's an influencer on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I guess. I've just checked out Coffee and a Case Note and thought I've got to have a chat to him because it was
I like the coffee and case or the a TikTok version goes, so he's educating and enlightening a younger audience. Maybe we should do grabs for TikTok. What do you reckon?
Well, maybe.
I don't know if my 13-year-old boy would be too happy, but
well,
that's not cool, Dad.
Why don't we wrap up the podcast and then we?
I think we can go back to about 1.5, not 1.26, and cut.
But I mean, I just did the news. I guess the only news is that there's been that reduction in quotas of people coming into Australia. There's talk of opening up more quarantine centres so that we could lift the quotas, but I think what we're going to find is that there's just the airlines like Emirates are just saying we can't continue to fly half-empty planes. We're just
which is understandable. Next week we'll have a look. Next week we'll have a look at the state migration plans, and we'll talk about them. And we've got coming up too. I know you've organised a few guests, but we have one wonderful super mum who is an education agent, a real estate salesperson, and a nightclub singer. And we're going to get our first singer on the Migrating to Australia podcast. She'll sing in Vietnamese. Unfortunately, you and I won't understand a word because we don't speak Vietnamese, but the tone, I've been to a few of her nights and she's an amazing singer. So an entertainer.
That will be good. I'll understand fat. That's about all. That's the only word I'll understand.
I wish I had an ear for tonal language. I would love to speak Vietnamese or Chinese or both.
I'm hopeless. I'm trying to learn Japanese just by watching Japanese
J-pop
band film clips and my phrase book. So,
that's good.
So I'm getting there one corny phrase at a time. Now, David, what's the situation with you working at the moment, and how do people get hold of you if they've
I'm working 6 days a week still. 1 day a week at home, 5 days a week in the office.
David calls this work. This is Saturday. This is day 6. Here's David working hard.
The story of Monday to Friday, I'm in the office, not seeing clients in person because of COVID, talking to clients on Zoom, Skype, FaceTime, telephone. All appointments are still on and operating. We just don't have them anybody physically in the office.
Cool bananas. So, David Bongiorno
and Twitter is the big one. If you want instant contact or near instant contact, direct message me on Twitter. I'm doing a step count grant. I'm doing a dietary program with a step count, so I'm always holding my phone to measure my step count. So people who contact me on Twitter will get a pretty quick reply because the phone's never far away.
Is that
a Fitbit?
It's not a Fitbit. It's a Polar. It's I've had it a few years now, and it tells me how many.
The only downside of having the phone for the step count is that a lot of people are getting pocket dials from me. I haven't got a case for my phone yet, so it's a new phone.
I checked this compared to my phone for accuracy, and they're within, if I do do my 10 laps of the park or whatever. They're within.
That's good. That's very. That's 10 laps is 4Ks.
Yeah, I generally just try and do my.
So how many steps is 4,000 Ks?
I try and do 10,000, but unless I dedicate to go out and do it in the morning and in the afternoon, I usually only get to about 8,000 because.
So you do half and half.
Yeah, well, I try and do
bookend the day.
6,500 in the morning, and then
yeah.
But I didn't today. I got up late and I didn't even have a shave or anything, David.
I think it's time to end the podcast.
So that's where we're at. So we've got another. When are we speaking to our Vietnamese singer?
I'll have to finalize that with you. I've seen her perform 3-4 times, and she's wonderful. She's just wonderful.
Because we'll have to get lots more stories until there's some actual news coming up.
Well, there is a bit of news. A few things have changed legislatively, and we can decode those and paint the picture in plain English as to what's been happening, what is happening. I thought we'd start next week with the state migration programs.
Great. Well, there we go. We'll be off into legislative territory in a week's time.
But we'll do it in a way that's engaging and fun, not dry. And when can people listen to Rohini?
Well, by the time, if they're listening to this, David, this will be Rohini. so David, they can listen to Rohini 10 minutes ago, okay? So, yeah. So I'm Grant Williams.
I'm David Bongiorno. Have a good weekend, everybody.
And this has been Australia's best top 10 list Migrating to Australia podcast.